They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you what happens when that blood is poisoned by greed. It doesn't just thin, it turns to venom, coursing through the veins of a family until the heart itself stops. For Eleanor Vance, a woman of 68 who had built an empire from dust and dreams, this was not a metaphor. It was the silent, brutal truth that arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered not by a doctor or a lawyer, but through the cold, indifferent glow of a tablet screen. She was in the finest rehabilitation center in New York, a place with polished floors and hushed, professional voices. Just weeks before, a massive stroke had tried to claim her, silencing her voice and stilling her limbs. But Eleanor was a fighter. She had fought her way from poverty, fought her way through boardrooms dominated by men, and she was fighting her way back to life now, one painful, shuffling step at a time. Her hope was a simple one: to return to the sprawling stone mansion she had shared with her late husband, to feel the solid weight of her life's work around her, and to see the face of her only son, Julian. A young, kind-hearted nurse, seeing Eleanor looking weary after her physical therapy, handed her a tablet. "To help you catch up with the world," she'd said with a warm smile. A small act of kindness that would inadvertently detonate Eleanor's world. With a curious tap, Eleanor opened Twitter, an application she rarely used. The very first post to load on her feed was from her daughter-in-law, Amelia. It was a photograph, bright and sharp. There they were, Julian and Amelia, standing before the grand entrance of the Vance estate, champagne flutes held high in a toast, their smiles wide and triumphant. The caption, however, was what stole the air from Eleanor's lungs. It read, "Here's to new beginnings and taking the helm. The future is ours. Number Vance legacy, number new chapter, number power couple." The words burned. Taking the helm, a chill, colder and more invasive than any hospital draft, crept over her skin. This wasn't a celebration, it was a declaration of conquest. In that single, sickening moment, everything became clear. The power of attorney they had urged her to sign when she was barely conscious, Julian's recent phone calls that were brief and distant, his excuses of being too busy to visit. It wasn't the stress of running the company in her absence. It was the thrill of stealing it. Her heart, the very organ that had betrayed her with a stroke, seized again, but this time it was from a pain far deeper than any physical ailment. The woman on the screen, smiling beside her son, was not family, she was an enemy. And her son was the traitor who had handed her the key. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you must first understand what was betrayed. It was not merely money or property that was stolen from Eleanor Vance. It was a legacy written in sweat, steel, and a love that was supposed to be unbreakable. Eleanor was not born into wealth. She was born into a world that expected little from her, and she had defied it at every turn. She was the daughter of a factory worker in a gritty part of Queens, a girl with hands that were supposed to be for typing or sewing, but she found they were better at reading blueprints and shaking hands on a deal. She had a mind like a diamond, sharp, clear, and capable of cutting through the noise and nonsense of the business world. Her partner in this defiant climb was her husband, Richard Vance. He was the architect, the visionary with a poet's soul who could see a skyscraper in a derelict lot. But Eleanor, she was the foundation. She was the one who secured the loans, who negotiated with unions, who stared down city planners and corporate raiders until they yielded. Together, they were a perfect synergy of vision and execution. Vance Enterprises wasn't just a company they started in a cramped second-floor office with a leaky radiator. It was the third partner in their marriage. They poured their youth into it. Their arguments were about zoning laws. Their date nights were spent poring over financial statements. Every brick laid in one of their buildings was a promise kept to each other. Every completed project, a monument to their shared dream. They built an empire that reshaped skylines, a testament to a partnership that was as solid as the concrete and steel they mastered. Then, 15 years ago, Richard was taken from her by a sudden, merciless cancer. The loss hollowed Eleanor out, leaving a void so vast she feared it would consume her. And into that void, she poured all that was left of her heart, all her ferocious energy and love, into their only son, Julian. Julian became her sun and her moon. In him, She saw Richard's thoughtful eyes and her own stubborn chin. He was the heir to everything they had built, the living continuation of their legacy. And so, she shielded him. Where she and Richard had faced struggle and failure as their greatest teachers, Eleanor was determined that Julian would never know such hardship. He was given the best of everything, not as a reward, but as a birthright. Prep schools that led to an Ivy League university, a European sports car on his 16th birthday, a penthouse apartment in one of their own buildings upon his graduation. When he joined Vance Enterprises, a corner office with a panoramic view of the city was waiting for him. He was intelligent, he had a good grasp of the business, but he had never known the gnawing fear of missing payroll, or the bitter taste of a deal gone sour. His mother was always there, a safety net woven from her own formidable strength. She saw it as protecting him, as giving him the life she and Richard never had. She never realized that a life without struggle is a life without strength. Julian, for his part, loved his mother deeply, but his love was entangled with a quiet, growing resentment. He lived in a world built by his parents. His name was on the company letterhead, but it was his mother's signature that held the real power. At board meetings, when he spoke, the executives would nod politely before turning their eyes to Eleanor for the final decision. He was a prince in a kingdom he had not conquered, and the crown felt hollow. He wasn't a man who had built an empire. He was the son of the woman who had. He longed, with a desperate, unspoken ache, to prove that he was more than just a fortunate son. He didn't want to just inherit the throne. He wanted to feel like he had earned it, or at the very least, taken it for himself. This potent mix of love, insecurity, and ambition made him a tinderbox, dry and ready for a spark. He didn't know it yet, but that spark was about to walk into his life, wearing a perfect smile and hiding a soul as cold and calculating as a banker's ledger. The love Eleanor had for her son was absolute, a force of nature. But even the strongest fortress can be brought down from the inside, especially when the gatekeeper himself is desperate for a change of command. Amelia Davenport entered the lives of the Vances, not with a bang, but with the quiet, calculated precision of a master chess player positioning her queen. She appeared at a high society charity gala, a fundraising event for the city's art museum that Eleanor co-chaired. She was a vision in emerald silk, a woman who seemed to carry her own spotlight. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was a polished, almost sculpted beauty, as if she had been assembled in a lab for maximum effect. Her smile was wide and dazzling, but Eleanor, a woman who had spent a lifetime reading the subtle tells in negotiation rooms, noticed it never quite banished the cool, appraising look in her eyes. She was introduced to Julian, and the effect was immediate and profound. For a young man who had always felt like a supporting actor in his own life, Amelia's focused, unwavering attention was like a drug. She didn't just listen to him, she seemed to absorb him, making him feel like the most fascinating man in a room full of powerful people. She laughed at his jokes, praised his insights on the market, and spoke to him not as the son of Eleanor Vance, but as Julian Vance, a man of untapped potential. Within weeks, Julian was utterly captivated. To Eleanor, Amelia presented a different, equally flawless facade. She was the picture of the perfect future daughter-in-law. She arrived at their Sunday dinners with perfectly chosen gifts. She remembered the name of Eleanor's late husband's favorite wine, and she listened with rapt attention as Eleanor recounted the old war stories of building the company. "Julian has told me so much about you, but he didn't do you justice," Amelia would say, her voice a low hum of admiration. "You're not just a businesswoman, Eleanor. You're an icon." She was a mirror, reflecting back the exact image of respect and deference that Eleanor, as the matriarch, felt she was owed. And yet, a faint, dissonant note hummed beneath the perfect symphony. Eleanor felt it during those dinners, a fleeting coldness in Amelia's eyes as she watched Julian interact with his mother. She saw it in the way Amelia's grip would tighten ever so slightly on Julian's arm when Eleanor offered him a piece of business advice. It was nothing she could put her finger on, nothing she could voice without sounding like a jealous, overbearing mother. Julian was happier than she had ever seen him. He seemed more confident, more driven. He was in love. For the sake of his happiness, Eleanor silenced the shrewd, suspicious businesswoman inside her and chose to be a supportive mother. It was the single most catastrophic business decision of her life. The poison was administered in small, sweet doses, always in private, in the luxurious quiet of the apartment Julian now shared with Amelia. The manipulation was a masterclass in psychological warfare. It began after a board meeting where Julian had proposed an aggressive new marketing strategy. Eleanor, seeing a potential flaw in the financials, had gently redirected the conversation, tabling the idea for further review. That evening, Amelia traced patterns on his back as they lay in bed. "You were brilliant today, my love," she whispered. "That idea was inspired. It's a shame your mother is so cautious. She built an empire for a different time. This new world, it requires bold moves. Your moves." Another time, after Eleanor had overridden Julian's decision on a minor personnel issue, Amelia had sighed dramatically. "She doesn't trust you," she said, feigning sadness. "It's not her fault, it's just. She's spent her whole life being in control. She doesn't know how to let go. She still sees you as that little boy she needs to protect, not the powerful man you've become. She never said, 'Your mother is wrong.' Instead, she would say, 'Your mother's way isn't the only way.'" She framed Eleanor's experience not as wisdom, but as an anchor holding him back. She presented Julian's inheritance not as a gift, but as a cage. Slowly, methodically, she began to isolate him. Old friends who knew his family well were subtly pushed aside, replaced by a new circle of people who only knew Julian as the impressive man at Amelia's side. She intercepted calls, managed his schedule, and became the gatekeeper to his life. She was building a wall around him, brick by insidious brick, and on the inside of that wall, she was rewriting his history. His mother's love became overbearing control. Her guidance became a lack of faith in his abilities. Her life's work became an old-fashioned legacy that he, with Amelia by his side, was destined to reinvent. Julian, hungry for validation and desperate to feel like his own man, devoured the narrative she fed him. He began to see his mother not as his greatest champion, but as his final obstacle. The loving son was being hollowed out, and in his place, a resentful, ambitious puppet was being crafted, waiting for his master to pull the strings. The storm broke on a Wednesday. It arrived not in the sky, but in the intricate, delicate network of vessels inside Eleanor Vance's brain. She was where she felt most powerful, in her penthouse office on the 50th floor of the Vance Tower, a glass monolith that stood as a testament to her life's work. The city glittered below her, a sprawling kingdom she had helped build. She was reviewing quarterly projections, her mind as sharp as ever, when the first sign came. A sudden, tingling numbness crept up her left arm, followed by a strange, metallic taste in her mouth. The numbers on the page began to swim, blurring into an incomprehensible mess. A wave of confusion washed over her, and when she tried to call out to her assistant on the intercom, only a garbled, slurred sound came out. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog. With the last ounce of her coordination, she fumbled for the silent alarm button beneath her desk, a direct line to building security and, by protocol, to her son, Julian. Then, the world tilted on its axis and dissolved into darkness. The Julian who arrived at the hospital was a terrified son. He was pale, his hands shook, and his eyes were wide with a genuine fear of loss. He still loved his mother, and the sight of her lying motionless in a bed, surrounded by a web of wires and tubes, shattered his carefully constructed resentment. But the Amelia who arrived with him was a different creature entirely. While Julian paced the sterile hallway, Amelia was the picture of calm efficiency. Her concern was perfectly pitched, her questions to the doctors were sharp and intelligent, and her hand on Julian's arm was a constant, steadying presence. But beneath the veneer of the worried daughter-in-law, a different part of her mind was worrying, calculating, and seeing the terrible landscape of tragedy, not as a disaster, but as an opportunity. A door had just swung wide open. Over the next 48 hours, Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness. The stroke was severe, the doctor said. Her speech was affected, her motor skills severely impaired. Recovery would be a long, arduous road. In her moments of lucidity, she was met with the anxious face of her son and the serene, reassuring smile of her daughter-in-law. They were a constant presence, a fact that in her medicated haze she registered as profound devotion. It was on the third day that Amelia made her move. She waited for a moment when Eleanor was awake and relatively clear-headed, though physically exhausted. She pulled a chair close to the bed, her expression a mask of gentle sympathy. Julian stood behind her, a nervous shadow. "Eleanor," Amelia began, her voice soft as velvet. "We hate to bring business to you at a time like this, but they're getting complicated." Julian chimed in, his voice strained. "The office is calling nonstop, Mom. The board wants an emergency meeting. There are contracts that need signing, major payments for the Hudson Yards project that are due this week. Without you, everything is grinding to a halt." "Heaven." Eleanor tried to speak, to tell them to call David Chen, her lawyer, but the words were thick and uncooperative. She managed a single slurred word, "David." Amelia's smile didn't falter. "We spoke to him, of course. But his hands are legally tied. He can advise, but he can't sign for you. He can't authorize payments from your personal accounts to cover company expenses. Everything requires your signature, Eleanor. And the doctors say you need to focus on one thing and one thing only, getting better." She reached out and took Eleanor's limp hand. "Julian and I were talking with the hospital's legal advisor. He said the quickest, simplest solution to protect the company, to protect your legacy, is for you to grant Julian a temporary power of attorney." She emphasized the word temporary, making it sound small and insignificant. "It's just a piece of paper, really. It would allow Julian to step in, to sign the necessary documents, pay the bills, and keep the ship steady. It's a huge burden, but he is ready to do it for you, so that you have absolutely nothing to worry about except your recovery." Eleanor's gaze shifted to her son. Julian nodded, his face earnest. "I just want to help, Mom. To take care of things until you're back on your feet. It's what Dad would have wanted." The mention of Richard was a masterstroke, a deliberate targeting of Eleanor's deepest emotional vulnerability. In her weakened state, the logic seemed sound. The company needed to be run. The bills needed to be paid. And who else could she possibly trust more with the keys to her kingdom than her own son, her beloved child? Later that afternoon, a lawyer she didn't recognize, a man with a brisk manner and a cheap suit introduced by Amelia, brought in the documents. He spread them on the bedside table. It was a thick stack of papers, filled with dense legal jargon that swam before Eleanor's eyes. She couldn't have read it if she wanted to. Her hand, the same hand that had signed billion-dollar deals, trembled uncontrollably as she took the pen. She looked up one last time, past the lawyer, past Amelia, and into the eyes of her son. She was searching for confirmation, for the unconditional love and loyalty she had banked her entire life on. Julian met her gaze, held it, and gave a small, reassuring nod. In that moment, he was no longer a resentful prince. He was her protector. At least, that is what she saw. With a surge of effort, she scrawled a weak, spidery signature on the line the lawyer indicated. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut, of a trap being sprung. It was the most important signature of her entire life, and she had given it based not on clauses and conditions, but on a son's promise. A promise that had already been broken before the ink was even dry. For a long time, Eleanor Vance did nothing but stare at the glowing screen. The world outside the tablet ceased to exist. The quiet hum of the hospital, the gentle scent of antiseptic, the very feeling of the crisp sheets on her skin, it all faded away, leaving only the photograph and its 13 cruel words. In the picture, Julian was smiling a smile she had never seen before. It wasn't the warm, slightly shy smile of her son. It was the broad, confident grin of a conqueror. Amelia leaned into him, her hand placed high on his chest, a gesture of unmistakable ownership. They weren't celebrating a new project. They were celebrating a coup. Her mind, a machine built for logic and strategy, tried to reject the data. "It's a mistake," one part of her screamed. "A misunderstanding. A tasteless, horribly worded joke." But the CEO inside her, The part that had survived decades of lies and corporate maneuvering was already assembling the facts. The power of attorney, presented as a temporary shield, was in fact a sword. The new lawyer, a man whose eyes never quite met hers, was not an advisor, but an executioner. The recent silence from her own trusted counsel, David Chen, was not a sign of respect for her recovery, but a symptom of his being systematically shut out. Each piece clicked into place with horrifying precision, forming an image of a betrayal so audacious, so complete, that it defied comprehension. The venom she'd felt in the abstract was now flooding her system, cold and paralyzing. With a trembling thumb, she navigated away from the social media app and found Julian's number in her contacts. Her fingers felt clumsy, alien, as she pressed the screen to initiate the call. Each ring echoed in the silent room, a hammer blow against her heart. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice casual, almost breezy. "Hey, you're up. How are you feeling?" The normalcy of his tone was a physical assault. It took all her strength to force her damaged vocal cords to work. The sound that emerged was a dry, raspy whisper. "Julian," the tweet. There was a sudden silence on the other end of the line. She could picture him perfectly, the quick flash of panic in his eyes, the way he would run a hand through his hair when caught off guard. "Oh, that," he said, his voice a little too quick, a little too dismissive. "You shouldn't be worrying about that, Mom. You know how Amelia gets with social media. It's just an announcement about the new initiative I'm heading up. You need to rest." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, that it momentarily cleared the fog of shock. A flicker of the old Eleanor, the woman who did not suffer fools, sparked to life. "Don't you dare," she rasped, her voice gaining a sliver of its former authority. "Don't you dare patronize me, Julian." The caption said, "Taking the helm. My helm. In front of my house. Explain it to me." Another pause, longer this time. In the background, Eleanor could hear a faint, indistinguishable murmur. It was a woman's voice, Amelia's voice. She was there, right beside him, coaching him, whispering the words, reinforcing his spine. When Julian spoke again, all the warmth, all the panicked uncertainty was gone. His voice was flat, cool, and rehearsed. It was a voice she had heard in boardrooms from men who were about to announce massive layoffs. "It means what it says, Mother," he said, the final word now sounding like a formal title, not a term of endearment. "There has been a corporate restructuring. The board agreed that during your extended and frankly indefinite leave of absence, a new CEO was necessary to ensure investor confidence. I have accepted the position." Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness. "The board? Julian, I am the majority shareholder. I am the board. It doesn't exist without me. The power of attorney you signed gave me full proxy and fiduciary control," he recited, the words clearly not his own. All legal protocols were followed. It was necessary to protect the company from instability. The antiseptic air in the room suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. She clutched the phone tighter, her knuckles white. "And my home? My personal assets, my stocks. Julian?" The silence that followed was the most brutal blow of all. It was the sound of her last hope dying. Then, his voice came back, devoid of any emotion, as if discussing a line item on a budget sheet. "All assets have been absorbed into a new holding trust under the primary Vance Enterprises corporate umbrella. It was done to streamline our portfolio and protect against potential liabilities. Everything is secure, Mother. Amelia and I are managing it all. You literally don't have to worry about a thing. You literally don't have to worry about a thing." The words hung in the air after he finished speaking. He had not just stolen her company and her home, he had stolen her very life, repackaged it, and was now presenting its theft as a favor. He was telling her that her life's work, her legacy, her home, were now mere items in a portfolio he and his wife were managing. The line clicked. He had hung up. Eleanor slowly lowered the phone. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. The betrayal was too profound for such simple expressions of grief. It was a wound beyond tears, an amputation of the soul. She stared at the blank wall of her hospital room, and in the sterile silence, a terrifying transformation took place. The loving mother, The trusting woman who had signed that paper died. The grief for the son she had adored curdled into something else. It was a calm, arctic rage, a clarity so sharp it hurt. She was no longer a patient recovering from a stroke. She was a queen dethroned, a founder betrayed, a mother discarded. And as she lay there, motionless, the first blueprints of a new and terrible structure began to form in the ruins of her heart. A plan for vengeance. The day Eleanor was discharged from the rehabilitation center, a cool autumn breeze was sweeping through the city, carrying with it the first hints of winter. The doctors were pleased with her progress. She could walk now, albeit with a slight limp and the aid of a simple, elegant cane. Her speech, though slower, had regained its clarity. To the medical staff, she was a success story, a testament to the resilience of the human body. They had no idea that the body they were releasing was merely a vessel for a mind that was now a weapon, being sharpened on the whetstone of pure, unadulterated rage. She declined the offer of a private car service dispatched by Mr. Vance's office, a courtesy she knew was designed to control her movements. Instead, she used her own credit card, one Amelia had foolishly overlooked, to summon a simple yellow taxi. The ride to her home on the Upper East Side was a silent, torturous pilgrimage through a kingdom that was no longer hers. Every Vance building they passed, every park her philanthropy had helped create, was a fresh stab of the knife. These streets were the veins of her life, and now someone else's blood was pumping through them. She watched the city she loved, the city she had helped to shape, with the detached gaze of a ghost haunting her own past. By the time the taxi pulled up to the familiar wrought iron gates of her estate, her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She paid the driver and stepped onto the curb, looking up at the grand stone facade. It was more than a house. It was a sanctuary. It was where she and Richard had planned their future, where they had raised Julian, where every portrait on the wall and every worn patch on the leather armchairs told a story. Now, it looked like a fortress, and she was on the outside. She walked up the blue stone path, her cane tapping a slow, rhythmic beat, the only sound in the unnerving silence. She reached the massive oak door, pulled her old, heavy brass key from her purse, and slid it into the lock. It stopped, unmoving, meeting the solid resistance of a mechanism that no longer recognized it. She didn't jiggle it, she didn't push. She simply stood there for a moment, absorbing the cold, final reality of that metallic click. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she drew her hand back and pressed the doorbell. It was Amelia who opened the door. The sight was a calculated display of power. She wasn't dressed in casual loungewear. She wore a sharp, tailored dress, her hair was perfect, and a string of Eleanor's own pearls was clasped around her neck. She was the new lady of the manor, and she was playing the part to perfection. Her face was arranged into an expression of pity that was more insulting than any sneer. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth and condescending. "We weren't expecting you today. I thought Julian said you were staying another week for observation." The implication was clear. You are being watched. You are not in control. Eleanor's own voice was quiet, but it held the density of granite. "I'm here for my things, Amelia." Amelia leaned against the doorframe, blocking the entrance. "Oh, Eleanor, I think you're still confused from your illness." Julian explained this on the phone. "The house is a corporate asset now. It belongs to the trust. For security reasons and tax efficiency, it serves as the official residence of the CEO. It's all quite standard." She waved a dismissive hand. "You can't possibly understand the complexities." For a moment, Eleanor felt the volcanic rage inside her, threatened to erupt, but she held it back, letting it cool and harden deep within her. Showing emotion now would be a weakness, a victory for the creature standing in front of her. "My clothes, my personal possessions. I am here to collect them." Amelia's lips curved into a small, cruel smile. "Of course, we wouldn't want to be inhospitable." She stepped back, not to let Eleanor in, but to gesture at a single, unfamiliar suitcase standing in the grand foyer. It wasn't one of Eleanor's matched set of Louis Vuitton luggage. It was a cheap, generic-looking roller bag. "We took the liberty of packing a few essentials for you, things we thought you'd be comfortable with." She said nothing as Eleanor, slowly, painfully, bent down to unzip the bag. Inside, she saw a collection of her oldest clothes. A tweed blazer she hadn't worn in a decade. A pair of worn-out cashmere sweaters. It was a collection of relics. A deliberate message that her time was over, that she belonged to the past. On top of the clothes sat a thick white envelope. Eleanor picked it up. Inside was a stack of crisp $100 bills. $10,000. A pittance, an insult. Julian wanted you to have that, Amelia said, her voice dripping with false charity. To help you with expenses. Finding a new place, something more manageable for someone in your condition. He really does worry about you. The door clicked shut. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. Eleanor Vance, the woman whose name was etched onto the city's skyline, was left standing on her own doorstep, holding a suitcase full of ghosts and an envelope of blood money. The humiliation was absolute, a crushing weight that would have broken a lesser person. But as she stood there, on the cold stone, a strange thing happened. The pain, the shock, the grief, they all burned away, consumed by a fire so intense it left behind only a chilling, perfect clarity. This was not an end. This was a beginning. This was rock bottom. And from here, the only way to go was up. Slowly, she turned away from the house, her grip tightening on the handle of the cheap suitcase. Her walk was no longer frail. Every tap of her cane on the pavement was a vow. They had taken her past. She was about to take their future. There was only one door in the city of New York that Eleanor knew would open for her. It was not the entrance to a bank or a prestigious club, but the heavy oak door of a law office in a storied old building downtown, a place that smelled of aged paper, leather, and unwavering loyalty. This was the office of David Chen, the man who had been Richard Vance's best friend since college, the lawyer who had drafted the first incorporation papers for Vance Enterprises on his own dining room table 40 years ago. He was the only person left who remembered the dream before it became an empire. Dragging the cheap suitcase behind her, Eleanor paid the taxi driver with one of the crisp $100 bills from the envelope, an act that felt like spending a coin given to her by the devil. She rode the rickety, caged elevator up to the 7th floor, the slow ascent giving her a moment to compose herself. She was not here to cry or seek pity. She was here to retain counsel, to open a new front in a war she had not started but was now determined to finish. David's secretary, a woman who had been with him for 30 years, gasped when she saw Eleanor. She ushered her straight into the inner office. David Chen was standing by his window, looking out at the city, but he turned as she entered. He was a man whose sharp mind was housed in a gentle demeanor, but as he took in her appearance, the cane, the weariness in her eyes, the humiliating suitcase, his expression hardened with a fierce, protective anger. He didn't say a word. He simply came forward, took her gently by the arms, and guided her to one of the deep leather chairs opposite his desk. He poured her a glass of water, his movements precise and deliberate. "I tried to call you, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low rumble of frustration. "Every day since the stroke, they wouldn't put me through. First, they said you were resting. Then, they said all communications were being handled by Mr. Vance's new executive assistant. I was locked out. What have they done?" With cold, dispassionate clarity, Eleanor laid it all out. The stroke, the hospital, the carefully worded persuasion for a power of attorney, the lawyer she didn't know, the tweet, the phone call, the changed locks, the suitcase, the pearls around Amelia's neck. She spoke not like a victim recounting a trauma, but like a general debriefing her field commander after a devastating ambush. When she was finished, the silence in the room was thick with fury. David sank into his own chair, his face grim. He ran a hand over his tired eyes. "That woman," he finally said, his voice laced with a bitterness that came from years of suppressed warnings. "I told you, Eleanor. From the first day I met her." She never looked at Julian. She looked through him, at the name on the buildings. Her type, they don't see people, they see assets. And Julian, he was so desperate for someone to see him as a king, he never realized she was just measuring him for a puppet's strings. He leaned forward, his professionalism taking over, though the anger still simmered in his eyes. "Tell me about the power of attorney. Exactly what you remember." As she recounted the details, he listened intently, occasionally making a note on a legal pad. When she finished, he leaned back with a sigh of profound defeat. "It's ironclad," he said, the words landing like stones. "They used a specialist, someone who knows exactly how to structure these things to be bulletproof. It grants him full fiduciary and executive authority. Everything he did, the corporate restructuring, the absorption of assets, transferring the title of the house, it's all technically legal under the authority you gave him." He saw the flicker of despair in her eyes and pressed on, wanting her to understand the full reality of their position. "If we challenge this in court, it will get ugly. They will use your stroke against you. Their lawyers will paint you as a confused, incapacitated old woman, mentally incompetent to make her own decisions, lashing out because she can't accept her retirement. They will drag your medical records through the mud. It will be a public, humiliating crucifixion, Eleanor. And in the end, I believe we would lose." The words hung in the air, a death sentence to any conventional hope of justice. The law, her lifelong shield and framework, had been turned against her. Eleanor stared at the photograph on David's desk, a smiling, vibrant picture of herself, Richard, and David at a long-ago company picnic. A time of honor and trust. She looked from the photo back to the weary face of her old friend. He saw the legal battle, the courtroom, the judges. He was thinking like a lawyer. "Then we won't fight them in a courtroom," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a newfound, chilling certainty. The shift was palpable. The victim had left the room. David looked at her, his head tilted in question. "You're thinking about the law, David," she continued. "It's time to think like a founder again. Richard and I didn't get our first big contract by having the best lawyers. We got it because we understood that our competitor was an arrogant fool who always overplayed his hand. We didn't attack his strengths, we used his ego against him. So, tell me, what are Amelia's weaknesses?" A slow understanding dawned on David's face. He leaned forward again, a spark of the old fighter returning to his eyes. "Greed," he said instantly. "She's insatiable. She doesn't just want the Vance fortune. She wants to be seen as the genius who made it even bigger." "Exactly," Eleanor affirmed. "And what else?" "Arrogance," David added. "Pride. She has a desperate, pathological need to prove that she is smarter than you, that she is the true visionary, not just some gold digger who got lucky." A thin, cold smile touched Eleanor's lips for the first time. "Good," she said. "Then that is our battlefield, not a courtroom. We can't sue her for the crime she already committed, but we can create the perfect environment for her to commit a new one, an undeniable one. We won't attack the fortress they've built, David. We're going to give them a brand new set of blueprints for a palace so magnificent she won't be able to resist building it herself. And we will make sure the foundation is built on quicksand." He stood up and walked to a small cabinet, retrieving a bottle of 25-year-old scotch and 2 heavy crystal glasses. He poured 2 fingers in each and handed one to her. The despair was gone, replaced by the familiar, electric energy of a plan taking shape. They were partners again, just like in the old days. He raised his glass. "To Richard," he said quietly. "He would have loved a good fight." Eleanor met his glass with a steady hand. "To Richard," she agreed. "And to the education of Mrs. Julian Vance. The first move in any war is to secure your supply lines." Eleanor's kingdom had been conquered, her treasury plundered, but her late husband was a man who believed in contingencies. Richard Vance was a brilliant architect, but he was also the son of a man who had lost everything in the Great Depression. He never trusted banks completely, and he certainly never trusted the idea of having all his eggs in one basket. Years ago, he had established an offshore trust, a completely separate financial entity with no legal ties to Vance Enterprises. He had funded it quietly over the years with profits from his own private investments. It was registered under a holding company named after a shared private joke, a name Amelia would never think to look for. He called it the Cassandra Trust, after the mythical prophetess cursed to see the future but never be believed. "This is for a rainy day, Ellie," he had told her, squeezing her hand. "For a storm so bad no one sees it coming." The storm was here. With David's help, navigating the labyrinth of international banking laws, Eleanor accessed the funds. It wasn't the vast fortune of the Vance empire, but it was more than enough. It was the war chest. Their first expenditure was not on lawyers or lawsuits, but on information. David knew that a common private investigator wouldn't suffice. They needed a ghost, a specialist in corporate and personal archaeology who could excavate a life buried under layers of lies. Through a discreet inquiry in the circles of high-stakes litigation, he found their man. He was known only as Mr. Finch. He was a small, unassuming man in his late 50s with graying hair and glasses, looking more like a university librarian than a hunter of secrets. They met in the quiet, dusty back room of an antiquarian bookshop in Greenwich Village. Finch didn't speak of breaking down doors or chasing leads in dark alleys. He spoke of data mining, forensic accounting, and the indelible digital footprints people leave behind. "Every life is a story written in code," he said, his voice quiet and precise. "You just need the right key to decrypt it." Eleanor explained what she needed. Everything. The real history of the woman calling herself Amelia Davenport. She gave him a starting point, the date of the charity gala where Amelia first appeared, and a blank check from the Cassandra Trust. Finch worked with a silent, terrifying efficiency. For the first week, there was nothing. Amelia Davenport, as a public entity, seemed to have sprung into existence 5 years ago. She had a flawless record, a degree from a prestigious European finishing school, a brief, successful stint at a London art gallery, and a small but pristine credit history upon her arrival in the United States. It was too clean, too perfect. As Finch reported to David, manufactured identities are like perfect diamonds. The flaw is the lack of flaws. The breakthrough came from the place where Amelia had been most arrogant, her own social media. Finch took the high-resolution photograph from the gala, isolated Amelia's face, and ran it through a powerful, non-public facial recognition software that cross-referenced everything from old university databases to international travel manifests and social media accounts from a decade prior. After 3 days of the algorithm churning through billions of data points, it found a match. Not in London or Geneva, but on the grainy, sun-bleached website of a community college in Reno, Nevada. The face was younger, the hair a different color, the expression harder, but the bone structure was identical. The name beneath the photo was Jennifer Peterson. Once Finch had the name, the dam of lies broke, and the putrid history of Jenna came flooding out. He delivered his findings to Eleanor and David in a slim, gray, nondescript binder. They sat in David's office after hours, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside, and read the story of the real Amelia. Jennifer Peterson was the daughter of a blackjack dealer and a cocktail waitress. She grew up in the shadow of the glittering casinos, learning early that fortune was something you took, not earned. Her official record began with a marriage at age 19 to a man named Michael Stratton, a local building contractor who had just come into a modest family inheritance. The pattern of her future crimes was born here, in miniature. Finch had unearthed the court filings. Within a year of their marriage, Jenna had convinced her adoring husband to make her an equal partner in his business. Then, through a series of complex and deliberately confusing transactions involving shell LLCs, she had systematically siphoned the company's assets, secured loans against its property, and then defaulted, plunging the business into a bankruptcy from which it never recovered. She filed for divorce a week later, walking away with what little liquid cash was left, leaving her husband buried in debt and legal ruin. Then she vanished. For the next 6 years, Jennifer Peterson ceased to exist. Finch's digital forensics, however, found traces of her ghost. A passport stamp in the Cayman Islands. A brief appearance as a consultant for a yacht broker in Monaco. She was moving through a world of transient offshore wealth, a pilot fish swimming alongside the sharks, learning their ways. It was during this period, Finch surmised, that she had crafted her new identity. She learned to dress, to speak, to mimic the effortless grace of old money. She had shed the skin of Jenna Peterson, the small-time grifter from Reno, and emerged as Amelia Davenport, the sophisticated, cultured woman ready for a much bigger prize. New York City. Eleanor closed the binder, her expression unreadable. David was shaking his head in disgust, but Eleanor felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. Her intuition had been right all along. She was not dealing with a misguided daughter-in-law or an ambitious social climber. She was dealing with a professional predator, a sociopath who had been honing her craft for years. This wasn't a family drama. This was a hunt. She opened the binder to the first page, which held a copy of Jennifer Peterson's old Nevada driver's license photo. The young woman in the picture stared back, her eyes holding a look of defiant, cheap ambition. There was none of Amelia's polished charm, only the raw hunger of Jenna. Eleanor stared at the photo for a long time, committing the real face of her enemy to memory. "So this is who you are," Eleanor whispered to the photograph, her voice low and steady. "It's good to finally meet you, Jenna. I was beginning to worry I'd never get the chance to know the real you before I destroyed you. To catch a shark, you don't wrestle it in the open ocean. You chum the water and lure it into a space where you control the outcome." Eleanor Vance, with the full, damning knowledge of Jennifer Peterson's past, now understood the nature of the creature she was hunting. Amelia, or Jenna, as Eleanor now thought of her, was driven by two powerful engines: an insatiable greed for more, and a desperate, arrogant need to prove she was a financial genius in her own right, not just the woman who had married into a fortune. These were not just weaknesses. They were the handles Eleanor would use to steer her directly into a cage. The plan she and David devised was a masterwork of corporate theater, a trap so beautifully disguised as an opportunity that not even the most paranoid predator would detect it. The first step was to build the stage. Using a significant portion of the Cassandra Trust's funds, David, through a series of anonymous legal firewalls, established a new, boutique investment firm. They called it Apex Global Ventures. It was given a prestigious address in a glass tower downtown. A sleek, minimalist website filled with impressive-sounding but deliberately vague jargon about emerging markets and disruptive technologies, and a board of directors composed of respected but retired international business figures who were loyal friends of David and Eleanor, all of whom were sworn to secrecy. Apex Global Ventures looked, to all outside observers, like the real deal: exclusive, aggressive, and incredibly successful. The second step was to create the bait. It had to be irresistible, something that appealed directly to Amelia's specific brand of ambition. Eleanor knew that while Amelia was enjoying her status as the new queen of Vance Enterprises, she secretly chafed at the fact that it was still Eleanor's name on the buildings. She needed her own legacy. The bait was a project codenamed the Serafina Development. It was a meticulously crafted fiction, an ultra-exclusive, environmentally sustainable luxury resort and residential complex to be built on a remote, privately owned island in the Caribbean. The prospectuses, designed by a top-tier firm paid handsomely for their discretion, were works of art. They featured stunning architectural renderings, forged environmental impact studies, and financial projections that promised a staggering 400% return on investment within 3 years. It was the kind of high-risk, high-reward venture that the established, more conservative Vance Enterprises would never touch, making it the perfect off-the-books opportunity for a visionary new leader to make her mark. The final, most crucial step was to choose the fisherman, the person who would deliver the bait to Amelia. It couldn't be anyone with a direct connection to Eleanor or David. It had to be someone Amelia would trust, someone she would see as a peer, or even better, as someone she could impress. The choice was Marcus Thorne, a semi-retired venture capitalist in his late 60s. Marcus was a contemporary of Eleanor and Richard, a man who had both competed with and respected them for decades. He was legendarily shrewd, possessed a silver tongue, and had a theatrical flair. He also owed Eleanor a significant favor from years ago when she had quietly saved his company from a hostile takeover. When David approached him and laid out the situation, Marcus's eyes lit up with the thrill of the game. "So, you're telling me," he had said with a grin, "that I get to help an old friend bankrupt a thieving little trollop, and have the most fun I've had in 20 years? Tell me where to sign." And the introduction was made at an exclusive wine auction, a venue where Marcus Thorne was a natural fixture, and where Amelia, eager to cement her place in New York's elite, was a predictable attendee. Marcus, playing his role to perfection, feigned a slight professional coolness toward her, acknowledging her as the woman who'd filled Eleanor Vance's rather large shoes. He let her come to him. He spoke loudly to a companion about the challenges of finding truly innovative projects, lamenting that all the big firms were too bureaucratic. Amelia, as predicted, took the bait and inserted herself into the conversation. Over the course of the next few weeks, Marcus slowly and masterfully reeled her in. He spoke of a secret investment circle he was a part of, one that only dealt in once-in-a-generation opportunities. He hinted at the Serafina development, describing it as the crowning achievement of his career, but lamented that the initial round of funding was already closed. He made her feel as though she was on the outside of the most important room in the world. Amelia, whose entire identity was built on being an insider, became obsessed. She pursued Marcus relentlessly, using all of her practiced charm to convince him that she and the newly revitalized Vance Enterprises were exactly the kind of forward-thinking partners he needed. Finally, after making her wait for what he deemed a sufficient amount of time, Marcus agreed to a clandestine meeting. In the opulent, hushed, private dining room of a five-star restaurant, he unveiled the prospectus for the Serafina development. As Amelia's eyes devoured the glossy pages and the impossible numbers, Marcus delivered the final, critical piece of the trap. "The buy-in is a minimum of $50 million, Amelia," he said, his tone serious. "And it has to be clean, liquid capital. No corporate financing that will show up on quarterly reports. My partners are private. They value discretion above all else. The funds must be wired to a holding account in the Cayman Islands. It's an all-or-nothing deal, and I need a decision by the end of the month." The hook was set. The high return catered to her greed. The secrecy and off-the-books nature catered to her arrogance, giving her a chance to build her own empire behind Julian's back. And the challenge of liquidating $50 million without raising red flags at the company she now controlled would appeal to her belief that she was smarter than everyone else. As she left the dinner, her mind was already racing, calculating, figuring out which corporate accounts she could drain, which assets she could leverage. She had no idea that the holding account in the Cayman Islands was owned by the Cassandra Trust, and that the beautiful, glittering palace she was about to build was, in fact, a prison designed just for her. The trap was laid. All Eleanor had to do now was wait for the sound of it snapping shut. The most dangerous moment for any predator is when it believes it is closing in on its prey. In its single-minded focus, it fails to see the closing jaws of the trap around it. Amelia Vance, née Jennifer Peterson, now saw herself as the apex predator of the New York financial world. The $50 million buy-in for the Serafina development wasn't an obstacle. It was a challenge, a thrilling test of the very skills she had spent a lifetime perfecting. She was so consumed by the prize, by the vision of her own legacy project eclipsing anything Eleanor had ever built, that she became blind to the mechanics of her own downfall. She believed she was being clever, a corporate raider pulling off a secret masterstroke. In reality, she was a mouse, eagerly running through a maze that Eleanor had designed, heading directly for the bait. Her first task was to liquidate $50 million without raising any alarms, particularly from Julian. While he was the nominal CEO, Amelia had expertly positioned herself as the company's chief strategist, the true power behind the throne. She had woven a complex web of subsidiary accounts and investment portfolios that Julian, who lacked his mother's granular attention to detail, found bewildering. He was happy to concern himself with the public-facing aspects of the job, the meetings, the speeches, the accolades, while Amelia handled the boring back-end finances. It was a weakness she had cultivated in him, and she now exploited it ruthlessly. From a secure, encrypted laptop in her home office, a digital fortress she believed was impenetrable, Amelia began to move the pieces. Mr. Finch, Eleanor's silent ghost, was watching every move. He had, with a discreet and entirely illegal bit of electronic wizardry, placed a silent monitoring software on Amelia's network. From a Spartan, server-filled room in his own office, he, along with Eleanor and David, had a front-row seat to the crime as it happened. They watched as Amelia identified her targets within the Vance Enterprises portfolio. First, she liquidated a series of municipal bonds, a low-yield but incredibly stable investment Eleanor had always maintained as a cash reserve. On the company's books, she disguised the transaction as a reinvestment into a new, higher-yield technology fund, forging the necessary paperwork to make it look legitimate. It was a clean $10 million. Next, she accessed the budget for a long-term commercial redevelopment project in Brooklyn, a project that was in its early, slow-moving stages. She cleverly deferred several major payments to subcontractors, citing fictitious permit delays, and rerouted $15 million from that project's capital account. To any casual observer, it would look like a temporary and prudent cash flow adjustment. The final $25 million was the most audacious move. Vance Enterprises held a significant, non-controlling stake in a German manufacturing firm, an investment Richard had made decades ago that had grown steadily and reliably. It was part of the bedrock of the company's wealth. Selling it would normally require a board resolution. But Amelia, using the full and unchecked power of the POA that flowed from Eleanor to Julian, and now, through Julian's authority, to her, drafted a document that authorized the sale for the purposes of diversifying European assets. She presented it to Julian for his signature amidst a tall stack of other, more mundane documents, explaining it as routine portfolio management. He signed it without reading the details, his trust in her financial acumen now absolute. Each transaction was a masterpiece of deception, a complex shell game designed to hide the P. But every move she made, every false invoice she created, every forged signature and rerouted wire transfer was being silently recorded, logged, and compiled by Finch into a digital dossier that was growing more damning by the hour. Eleanor watched the screens in Finch's office, her expression a mixture of cold fury and grim satisfaction. She was watching a stranger methodically dismember the company she had spent her life building, and yet every criminal act was a nail being hammered into her enemy's coffin. The final stage of the plan was the wire transfer. Marcus Thorne called Amelia, his voice tense with manufactured urgency. "The window is closing, Amelia. My partners are getting nervous. It's now or never. I need the funds transferred within 24 hours, or the deal is off the table." The manufactured pressure worked perfectly. It pushed Amelia to act hastily, to bypass the last few safety protocols she might have otherwise observed. Late that night, long after Julian was asleep, Amelia sat in the glow of her laptop. She initiated the wire transfer, sending the $50 million from a consolidated holding account in Delaware to the numbered account in the Cayman Islands that Marcus had provided. As she typed the final authorization code and hit enter, she felt a surge of triumph unlike anything she had ever known. This was her moment, her victory, the culmination of her life's ambition. She had outsmarted Eleanor Vance. She had used the old woman's own money and her fool of a son to launch her own, far more brilliant legacy. She was no longer just the woman who took the Vance empire. She was the woman who would build a new one. Miles away, in the sterile quiet of Finch's office, a notification pinged on the screen. "Transfer complete," it read. The $50 million, bled from the heart of Vance Enterprises, had vanished from the Delaware account and, after a brief, dizzying journey through the arteries of global finance, had reappeared, safe and sound, in the coffers of the Cassandra Trust. The money had simply made a round trip, leaving a blazing, undeniable trail of grand larceny in its wake. David Chen let out a long, slow breath. "We got her," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and relief. "Wire fraud. Embezzlement. Securities fraud. It's a federal case. She's finished." Eleanor stared at the screen, at the record of the transaction, the final, irrefutable proof of the crime. She felt no joy, no elation, only a profound, icy calm. The fish had not only taken the bait, it had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. The trap had sprung. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. The time for justice was about to begin. The stage for the final act was set not in a courtroom, but in the place where the Vance Empire was born and where it would be reborn, the main boardroom on the 50th floor of the Vance Tower. It was a room that commanded power, with a wall of glass overlooking the city and a sprawling mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. David Chen, in his capacity as a long-standing board member and legal counsel, had invoked a rarely used clause in the corporate bylaws to call an emergency meeting of the board and key shareholders. The stated purpose on the agenda was bland and corporate: to discuss urgent fiduciary matters and review executive leadership. Julian and Amelia received the summons with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. They saw it as a desperate, pathetic last stand by David Chen, a loyal old dog barking at the new masters of the house. They walked into that boardroom with the supreme, unshakable confidence of winners. Amelia was radiant, dressed in a crimson power suit, the picture of a bold, modern CEO. Julian, at her side, looked relaxed and authoritative. They took their seats at the head of the table, nodding graciously to the other board members, old allies of Eleanor, who now looked at them with carefully neutral expressions. They were expecting a dry, legalistic argument from David, a final, futile attempt to challenge the power of attorney. They were utterly unprepared for what happened next. The boardroom doors opened one last time, and Eleanor Vance walked in. The silence was absolute, a sudden vacuum of sound and air. She was not the frail, limping woman they had last seen. She still carried the cane, but she moved with a cold, deliberate grace. She was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored dark gray suit, her silver hair styled perfectly. She looked regal, powerful, and very, very dangerous. Her eyes, however, were what held the room captive. They were not filled with anger or sadness, but with a chilling, detached calm, the eyes of a judge who has already passed sentence. She didn't look at Julian or Amelia. Instead, she took a seat opposite them, at the other end of the long table, placing a slim, gray binder in front of her. David Chen stood up. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice formal. "We are here to discuss a series of unauthorized financial transactions that have put this company at grave risk. The transactions, totaling $50 million, were executed by Mrs. Amelia Vance." A ripple of shock went through the room. Amelia laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "This is absurd," she said, looking around the table for support. "David, I know you're upset about the changes, but this is slander. All of my strategic financial decisions have been for the benefit of this company. Julian can attest to that." Julian dutifully nodded, a look of stern disapproval on his face. "David, this is out of line. You're bordering on libel." End quote. Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Are you referring to the sale of our holdings in the Kruger Group, Julian? The document you signed, authorizing the sale for the purposes of diversifying European assets?" Julian's confidence wavered for a fraction of a second. "Yes, of course, a sound financial decision." "Ah, and the money from that sale," Eleanor continued, her eyes still not on him. "Where did it go?" Amelia interjected, her voice sharp. "Into a holding account, pending reinvestment. This is rudimentary portfolio management, something you might have forgotten." "Is that so?" Eleanor said. She opened the gray binder, because the digital trail, which we have here, shows that money, along with $40 million embezzled from other company accounts, was wired to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, an entity called Apex Global Ventures, as a buy-in for a real estate project called the Serafina Development. The color drained from Amelia's face. The name of the project, the name of the firm, these were secrets. No one could have known. Julian looked at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Amelia? What is she talking about?" Eleanor finally lifted her gaze and locked eyes with her daughter-in-law. "The Serafina Development does not exist, of course," she said calmly. "And Apex Global Ventures is a construct. Its sole purpose was to provide you with a believable destination for the $50 million you were stealing from this company." As she spoke, David Chen dimmed the lights, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. On it, a series of documents appeared: forged invoices, records of the illegal wire transfer, screenshots of Amelia's encrypted emails with Marcus Thorne. "We have a full, unassailable record of your crime, Amelia," Eleanor stated, her voice as cold as a morgue slab. But a simple crime of greed seemed so uninspired. "So, we decided to learn a little more about you." The screen changed. The polished professional headshot of Amelia Davenport was replaced by a grainy, decade-old driver's license photo from Nevada. The name beneath it was Jennifer Peterson. Or should I say Jenna? "Your ex-husband in Reno, Michael Stratton, was very interested to hear from our investigators. The story of how you bankrupted his construction company and disappeared was remarkably familiar." A collective gasp went through the boardroom. Julian stared at the screen, then at his wife, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "Amelia, who is that?" Amelia was frozen, her perfect facade cracking and crumbling in real time. The hunter was now the hunted, pinned in the spotlight. The final blow came as 2 uniformed police officers and 2 plain-clothed detectives entered the room, led by Mr. Finch. They walked silently and purposefully to the head of the table. One of the detectives looked at Amelia. "Jennifer Peterson, also known as Amelia Vance," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities fraud." The sound of the handcuffs clicking around Amelia's wrists echoed in the stunned silence. She didn't scream or fight. She just stared at Eleanor, her eyes finally stripped of all pretense, revealing only a bottomless well of hatred. Julian was catatonic, his world completely shattered. He looked from his handcuffed wife to his mother, who sat watching, her face a mask of ice. He finally understood. This wasn't a hostile takeover. This was an execution. And he had been the one to hand the executioner her sword. The great drama of the Vance family was over, and the curtain had come down on a scene of utter, devastating ruin. The aftermath of the boardroom confrontation was not a celebration of victory, but a quiet, somber sweeping up of shattered pieces. Amelia, or rather Jennifer Peterson, faced a mountain of federal charges from which there was no escape. Her assets were frozen, and her carefully constructed world of lies was publicly dismantled in a series of brutal, unflattering headlines. She was a 9-day wonder for the tabloids, a cautionary tale of greed and ambition. And then she was gone, swallowed by the cold, anonymous machinery of the justice system. The company, Vance Enterprises, was in turmoil. The scandal sent shockwaves through the market, and investor confidence plummeted. But Eleanor, with the steadfast loyalty of David Chen and the old guard of the board, stepped back into the role she had never truly left. She worked with a tireless, almost fearsome, efficiency to right the ship. She was once again the matriarch, the founder, the unshakable core of the empire she had built. She had won. She had reclaimed her kingdom, her money, her power. But victory felt strangely hollow, like a grand, empty hall echoing with the ghosts of what she had lost. The true casualty of this war was not Amelia, but Julian. He was a ghost himself now, haunting the periphery of the life he had so casually thrown away. The public humiliation, the revelation of his wife's monstrous deceit, and the terrifying, cold competence of his mother's revenge had broken him completely. He was stripped of his CEO title, his name a mark of shame within the company. He lost the grand house, the fancy cars, the respect of his peers. He lost everything he thought he wanted, only to realize he had also lost the one thing he had always truly possessed without ever valuing it, his mother's unconditional love. Weeks after Amelia's arrest, he came to her, not at the office, but at the house. Eleanor had moved back in and was slowly, painfully, trying to erase the stain of Amelia's presence. He stood on the doorstep, not as a conqueror, but as a beggar. He was thinner, his eyes were haunted, and the arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by the raw, desperate shame of a lost child. He stood before her in the grand foyer, the same spot where she had been handed a suitcase and cast out, and he wept. He spoke of his foolishness, his insecurity, his weakness. He told her how Amelia had twisted his mind, how she had fed his ego and his resentments until he couldn't see the truth. He begged, with a sincerity born of total devastation, for her forgiveness. This was the moment the story was supposed to end. With a tearful reconciliation, a prodigal son returning to the fold, a mother's love conquering all. But Eleanor Vance had been hollowed out, and the space once filled with that love was now occupied by something else, something cold and hard and permanent. She listened to his entire, pathetic confession without interruption, her face calm, her eyes giving away nothing. When he was finished, breathless and sobbing, a profound silence filled the hall. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and the man she saw was a stranger. She felt no flicker of maternal pity, no echo of the love that had once defined her. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too absolute. It was a wound that could never be scarred over. "Forgiveness?" she finally said, her voice not cruel, not angry, but terrifyingly empty. "Forgiveness is for mistakes, Julian, for errors in judgment. What you did was not a mistake. It was a choice. You chose a liar over your mother. You chose greed over loyalty. You chose to try and erase me." She took a small step closer, her presence immense in the quiet hall. "The son I loved," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "the boy I raised and cherished, died in that hospital room when he allowed that woman to put a pen in my hand. He died when he stood by and watched her throw me out of my own home. You are just a stranger who wears his face." He looked at her, his eyes pleading, unable to comprehend the finality in her words. "Mother, please, do not call me that," she said, the words as sharp and final as a guillotine's blade. "You are no longer my son, and I am no longer your mother. You have your inheritance. It is the memory of what you did. Live with it." She then turned, and with the steady, unwavering grace of a queen, she walked up the grand staircase, leaving him utterly, finally, and irrevocably alone in the vast, empty space of the life he had destroyed. Her justice was complete. It wasn't in getting her money back or sending a criminal to jail. The true justice was this final, terrible act of severing. She had given him life once, and now she was taking it away again, leaving him with nothing but the air in his lungs and the full, crushing weight of his consequences. In the end, it is a story that serves as a chilling reminder. In the intricate tapestry of family, there are threads of love and duty, of trust and history. But when those threads are deliberately cut, they can never be rewoven in the same way. Never, ever underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. For after the silence, there is no storm. There is only the calm, quiet, and permanent cold of a world that has been irrevocably changed.